Hello and welcome to the Ask Dr Vee podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Linde, a medical doctor passionate about bringing out the best in my patients and community through holistic health. Today we are speaking about a highly fascinating subject, sleep. This podcast is condensed with so much good information that you'll want to keep listening for tips on how to optimize your sleep, as well as what the determinants of good sleep are. We'll speak about optimal timing, duration and intensity, as well as what the consequences of sleep loss are, including the increased risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, and even cancer. We'll also discuss what the factors are that drive that intense craving in the morning for a strong cup of coffee, which is very interesting. So without further ado, let's dive into the content. Sleep is definitely one of those topics that the more you learn, the more you want to know. And as one of the main determinants of health, it's very important to understand what it is because it determines how we age and how well we mentally and physically perform. Sleep can basically be divided into two main categories. We get rapid eye movement sleep or REM sleep and non-REM sleep. Non-REM sleep is then further divided into 4 stages with increasing intensity. In other words, stage 1 is the most shallow, if I can call it that, level of sleep. And as you progress to stage 4, you go into deeper levels of sleep. Every cycle, which includes REM and all the stages of non-REM, lasts on average for 90 minutes, with men's cycle being around 15 minutes longer than in women. Now, this doesn't mean men need more sleep. It's just important to understand that there are variances and differences between biological men and biological women. During sleep, there's a constant tug of war in the brain between REM and non-REM because they have very different functions. The first half of the night when the body is detoxified, REM dominates. The second half, when the brain is detoxified, non-REM tends to dominate. What is currently trending that I've seen on social media is to artificially stop your sleep at these 90-minute cycles, which is quite dangerous to do and not recommended because you're not sure how your average cycle looks and there is this difference between men and women, you could be disrupting your sleep at a very important stage that has a very specific function. So neuroscientists and sleep specialists recommend listening to your body. In other words, your alarm should be there as a fail-safe so that you do actually wake up, but the best is to listen to your body. It's something that I've been trying to adjust to, but it really does take time and it is quite difficult. Regarding the stages, there's always this question about which stage is the most important, and I think a lot of people have put emphasis on the REM stage, but there are arguments for and against each stage. Therein lies the answer. They're all important because each stage has a different function. For example, in stage 1 and 2 of non-REM, the process of removing amyloid from the brain occurs. Amyloid buildup is one of the progenitors of Alzheimer's disease. So if we're not getting enough stage 1 and 2 or light sleep, we aren't effectively removing amyloid and the risk of developing Alzheimer's is increased. Other functions such as memory formation and emotional regularity occur in REM. We'll touch on this a little later, but basically, if we're not getting enough REM, our ability to control our emotions and reactions are reduced. Our ability to store short-term memories are also greatly influenced by reduced REM. But don't panic. Tips on how to optimize sleep are shared towards the end of the podcast. I think it's just amazing to note how our brains were created to be in sync and perform a multitude of functions both during consciousness and during sleep. Sleep is also very interestingly based on a circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is a repeatable cyclical activity that is needed for cell repair and optimal function. The timing of our circadian rhythms is determined by the master's body clock. It's a group of suprachiasmatic nuclei in the brain. This region basically responds to day and night, and being the body's clock is responsible for alertness and mental and physical performance during the day, including your reaction time, as well as sleepiness or sleep at night. Dr. Rhoda Patrick, a PhD in neuroscience, has discovered that this very circadian rhythm is coded for by 15% of our entire genome. In other words, 15% of our entire genetic code is responsible for the circadian rhythm and responds to the circadian rhythm. That's why when your sleep is interrupted or inadequate in intensity or duration or any of the stages we mentioned earlier, it affects so many different functions. What's important to note and understand is that most of us spend 90% of our days indoors and in buildings, and we're not getting enough bright sunlight at midday. And then at night, our brains are being overstimulated by all the blue light exposure from screens in the form of phones, tablets, and TVs, so on and so forth. So our circadian rhythms are constantly out of sync, which could be why you might be struggling with nighttime wakefulness and daytime sleepiness and waking up desperate for that strong cup of coffee. Or has this maybe ever happened to you? It's definitely happened to me, when you fall asleep for 30 minutes and then suddenly wake up more energized than you were throughout the day. This has everything to do with our circadian rhythms. One of the recommendations would be to turn off screens when the sun sets, which can help restructure our brain and reset the clock. I mean, this is a little bit impractical, so an alternative is to put a blue light filter on. Most smart TVs and smart screens or smartphones have this automatically built in, where you can choose that. Or you could just get those blue light filter glasses available online and install. So there's lots of different ways you can do that. Dr. Rhoda, the PhD in neuroscience, also says that she particularly changes light bulbs to exclude blue light in places like the bedroom. So you've got non-stimulating, warm light in the bedroom, which should be reserved for sleep and intimate pleasure. So what happens if we don't have enough sleep or enough good quality sleep? When we have highly variable sleep patterns, we have a 4-fold increased risk for cancer, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. So good sleep is not a nice to have, it's a must have. The damage done to our bodies and brains throughout the day is cleared up during sleep. One of the biggest hormones involved in this is melatonin, which most of you have heard of or even used, which we'll get to later. Melatonin is a hormone produced in the pineal gland in your body, and its release is stimulated by darkness or dim light. It's not a strong stimulator of sleep per se, but rather it reinforces signals sent to the body and brain to slow down and go into a state of rest. What is very interesting about this hormone is it's linked to decreased cancer risks. In studies published in the British Journal of Cancer, the authors reviewed multiple other studies in something called a meta-analysis. Basically, this is a study of other studies. They found that melatonin had oncostatic properties. In other words, it slows down the rate of cancer growth and the rate of the risk of development. So very, very important to be getting normal circadian rhythm, to be getting enough daytime light and enough sleep or enough dim light at night so that we can have these protective factors against multiple diseases. Lots of people think sleep is a dormant process, but in other words, when you go to sleep, your brain goes to sleep, and it couldn't be further from the truth. Sleep is a very active process of the brain whereby toxins are removed and other hormones are stabilized. 2 of these hormones are responsible for appetite regulation. So ghrelin and leptin are directly related to sleep adequacy. Ghrelin is a hunger hormone. I can't help but imagine a hungry little monster, like one of those green little gremlins that comes out and just wants to eat everything. It's quite funny as I was preparing for this podcast. Autocorrect kept changing my notes to gremlin. So it really does sound like a gremlin. It's the hunger hormone, stimulates hunger. The satiety or fullness hormone is leptin. This is stimulated by things such as stretching of the stomach. The popular diabetes drug, which Hollywood made famous for weight loss, and is indeed very helpful for weight loss, but in South Africa strictly for diabetic patients, is Ozempic. One of its many mechanisms of action is directly to increase leptin levels. That's why if you're hungry and you drink a lot of water and you stretch your stomach, the hunger tends to subside. It has to do with leptin levels. Okay, so when you have disturbed sleep, again, either in duration or quality, your ghrelin levels are higher and leptin levels are lower. This results in increased hunger and lower energy levels and directly causes carbohydrate craving. I remember back in internship and community service, doing either a 24 or 32-hour call and just being so hungry on the way home. I would stop religiously at a total garage, or a garage, sorry, probably shouldn't mention names, and I would just carbo load. I would get as many sweetie puffs and chocolates and things that I could, but it never felt like enough. So these foods are obviously energy dense and help the perceived energy crash caused by higher ghrelin levels. What's important to note, because of this increased ghrelin levels and this increased hunger and drive to get energy-dense food, people who sleep on average 6 hours or less or have poor quality sleep have a 55% weighted increase in weight gain. Very, very interesting. Now, you obviously get your outliers that this doesn't happen for, but most of us mere mortals are affected by the statistics. Most of us require about 7 to 9 hours of good quality sleep with enough duration through the various stages. The craving of energy-dense foods when we are sleep-deprived also has to do with the reward center in the brain. Studies done at the Stanford Sleep Lab showed that sleep deprivation was linked with a heightened sensitivity to dopamine in the reward center of the brain. Someone said it like this: Happy emotions tend to be happier, and sad emotions tend to be sadder. Have you guys ever noticed that? When you sleep deprived, you tend to feel a little bit more emotional, so either happier or a little bit sadder. And I'd like to add to that, it makes risk-taking riskier. Risk-taking is linked to dopamine, meaning that sleep deprivation directly increases our risk of addictions and binging behaviors, including binging on food, social media, TV, etc. This heightened sensitivity to dopamine also causes a reduced inhibition. This medically, we just use this to say a reduced sense of self-control or the ability to say no when it comes to things like spending money, gambling, and driving behaviors. Something to be very mindful of if you are a shift worker or struggle with sleep in general. Just to know it means that you can or having an awareness means you can have behavior regulation as well. You could easily put systems in place to reduce your access to those risky behaviors. So referring back to ComServe, after 10 kilograms of weight gain, I decided to skip the garage and get protein-dense, carbohydrate-controlled snacks at home. Protein obviously keeps us fuller for longer with a low glycemic index and slower release of energy. So it really does help for that energy craving that the brain wants when we are sleep deprived. Okay, so what do we do if we are not getting enough sleep? The answer lies in the duration, timing, and intensity. The goal of duration, as I mentioned earlier, is to get about 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Timing is then the next factor. Getting our circadian rhythms back in sync and resetting the brain is the next step. Setting a regular sleeping time is a good idea, and regularity is the key. We have spoken about the wind down option or the blue light blocking option on most smartphones, and there is obviously that option where you can put wind down. So for my family and I, we typically put wind down, which basically puts your phone into sleep mode and causes you to turn off all your screens at about 9 o'clock. And we go to bed at about 10 o'clock to wake up between 5 and 6 every morning, getting about 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep. So that is something you can put into place. And obviously, I'm not advocating for the same hours of us, but I am advocating to give yourself enough time to sleep, enough time to fall asleep, and enough time to go through all the cycles. Another recommendation is getting 30 minutes of direct sunlight exposure throughout the day. Obviously not when UV is at its highest to mitigate the risk that UV damage causes in terms of aging and the risk of any skin cancers. But it could be 10 minutes when walking from your car to the shops. Instead of parking outside the entrance, park far away. And then you get that sudden exposure of sunlight, that unintentional exposure. You just need 30 minutes a day. We speak about getting enough physical activity throughout the day. It's very, very important, preferably before the sun sets, because that helps with our circadian rhythm. Funny enough, in people that start exercising after a period of latency, the first few weeks of sleep quality is worsened. But the studies found that those who push through beyond 6 weeks or so of regular exercise reap the rewards of improved sleep. So keep going. Please, 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 please keep going. The health benefits with regular exercise, there's numerous, but I know the first 2-3 weeks are tough. Thereafter, it definitely does get better and improves your cycling through all the stages. Okay, so let's postulate you're doing all these things. You're regularly exercising, you're turning off blue light, you're getting enough sunlight. What else is available to us? First, I just want to clarify there is no silver bullet with anything regarding health or holistic approach that includes an assessing and supporting mental health, physical health, and spiritual health is a necessity. Specifically when it comes to sleep, there are a few natural supplements or nutraceuticals that can aid sleep. Another meta-analysis, which was published in 2022, found evidence for supplementing with things like amino acids, melatonin, and vitamin D. Those three specifically significantly increase sleep. To fall asleep, they recommend fast-release melatonin, about 1.5 milligrams to 3 milligrams 30 minutes before sleep. To stay asleep, a time-release or extended-release melatonin is recommended in a similar dosage. You could add 5-hydroxytryptophan, around 50 to 100 milligrams per day. Magnesium glycinate, also very, very important, and I prefer taking this at night. Valerian root, passiflora, zinc, resveratrol, and nitrates. All of these are available at your local pharmacy and over the counter. And I like dosing them throughout the day because they've got various other effects. And then obviously we know L-theanine, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned it, but chamomile, that are very, very effective nutraceuticals to helping you with sleep. Because the body works as a whole and is not an isolated system, it's very, very important to remember that sleep can also be affected by stress and hormonal balance. You could regulate your stress levels and support the adrenals through adaptogens such as ashwagandha. Love ashwagandha to support the adrenals, especially those facing adrenal fatigue and adrenal burnout. You're going to have reduced sleep because of that, because it's obviously a stimulating hormone that or cortisol stimulates and suppresses all your other hormones. It stimulates you, but suppresses all your other hormones. So supporting the adrenals and helping getting that in balance with ashwagandha is very important. There's also so much evidence around mindfulness and meditation. I found that the Calm app, available on Android and iOS in the Apple Store, is also so helpful. They've got things like sleep stories that help you turn those intrusive thoughts off. So I'm not sure if anyone else has struggled with this. I definitely have. Before exam time or before a big project is due, my head will hit the pillow and boom. It's like my mind runs a mile a minute. And honestly, the Calm app has these amazing sleep stories available. We often go to the Lavender Fields one by Stephen Fry. That man's voice is just magical. So treat yourself to that. Yoga Nidra is also something that is very helpful. You can find it on YouTube. And you literally just play it in the background and you'll be asleep by 15 minutes. It really is amazing to turning off those intrusive thoughts. When it comes to something more stronger, if I can put it like that, not to say that these other nutraceuticals can't be strong, but when it comes to scheduled medication, this should be reserved for extreme cases and not to be taken regularly or long term because of their effect on brain structure. We need to remember sleep is an indicator and a determinant of health. So in other words, if your sleep is disrupted, it's busy telling you something else is going on in your body. Either very high stress levels, or there's hormonal imbalance, or something else is going on, because it indicates to you how the rest of your body is functioning. And also if you've got interrupted sleep, we know that it determines health, as we've mentioned earlier. So very important to know that. And if you are struggling with sleep, you've put all these other things in place, as you've taken supplements, please reach out to your medical doctor, your medical practitioner, who can advise you on healthier other options. You might need a short term of scheduled medication. We might need to help you with hormonal imbalance. We might need to even help you with things like depression and anxiety. So please do reach out there. I also realize there's a lot of moms listening that have toddlers and babes that have a desperate plea for help with sleep. So this is a touch and go area. And again, this podcast is meant for information and entertainment. It's not meant for medical advice. So please discuss this with your pediatrician. But there has been limited evidence regarding melatonin. So please discuss that with your medical practitioner. If your little one has been struggling with sleep and you've done the sleep training, you've used chamomile and rooibos tea, you've taken away stimulants and the blue light, please remember that. It would be definitely something worth chatting to your pediatrician about. So yeah, we've covered what sleep is, what it does, the various stages, the joys of sleep, and how it can be used as a health indicator and how to optimize it. So thank you so much for joining me and giving me your time. If you found this helpful, it would mean the world to me if you shared it with people in your world. I'd also love to hear back from you. So please pop in the comments if there are any other topics you'd like us to cover. Next week, we are going to be listening about botulinum toxin. So very interesting talk. I hope to see you there. Till then, take care.